All right, this is the Gallup poll over time, over the last 20 years, showing the favorability rating for the two main political parties in our country. Red for Republican, blue for Democrat. Over time, big picture, as you can see, the Democratic Party is sort of broadly more popular, more well-liked in the country than the Republican Party is. The second term of the George W. Bush presidency in particular. Way earlier than that, though, Republicans do have this one big problem area. One big plunge. It's more than a dip, right? They kind of fell off a cliff right there. What exactly was going on right there that made the country hate the Republican Party so much more dramatically than they had ever hated them before? That was the vote to impeach President Bill Clinton for stooping an intern. Republicans, of course, saw that as a great political triumph. They had finally impeached a Democratic president, but the country hated them for it. Over the last 20 years, the country has never hated Republicans more than they hated them at that moment. Until now. The new Gallup polling on the American public's view of the Republican Party is now the worst it has ever been in modern times. It has even gone lower than it was during the Clinton impeachment era. And that apparently is the reward that you get if you can stretch your government shutdown to be longer than Hanukkah. It is more than 8 easy nights now. We are into day 9. And day 9, I guess, is when the wheels start to fall off. Things really did just seem like they started to break apart today. And I think it started with the front page of this morning's newspapers. The fact that Republican members of Congress no longer believe blowing through the debt ceiling might be a big deal. They no longer believe that defaulting on the national debt would have catastrophic consequences. The denialism that the debt ceiling matters at all, that has been a story that's been percolating a while now in this crisis, right? It's been covered extensively in places like the National Journal, places like Talking Points Memo online. It's been on MSNBC. You've seen it on this show. It is a known story that has been increasingly reported out over the course of the crisis. But today, for whatever reason, today was the day that this story about Republican denial of the debt ceiling being a big deal, today was the day it finally landed on the front pages in places like the New York Times and Politico.com. It also got very prominent placement in the Wall Street Journal. And it's kind of hard to believe that Wall Street actually has to read it in the Wall Street Journal before they believe it's true. But in fact, the mainstream, influential financial and political press finally waking up to the fact that Republicans are in la-la land about whether the debt ceiling is a big deal, that finally seems to have woken some people up today. That today, finally, with it on the front pages, seems to have made this issue go off like a particularly loud and jarring alarm clock. Because today was the day that Wall Street finally started to freak out about what is happening in Washington. I mean, if you have been watching closely recently, you would have seen that things like the VIX, what they call the fear index, that has been going up over the last few weeks since the shutdown crisis has been upon us. Over at Ezra Klein's Wonk blog, they've been watching the price of short-term bonds go up. See how it spikes there on the right side of the graph? And that's a bad sign, but it's a very specific, wonky, and relatively small sign. Today was the day that the signs got bigger. Today was the signs that we started to get bigger and much less subtle signs that the ground is shaking beneath Wall Street. The biggest shudder today was when the investment firm Fidelity dumped U.S. Treasury bonds. Fidelity is the biggest manager of money market mutual funds in the whole country, and today they announced that they have sold off all U.S. government bonds that might come due around the time that we are due to be hitting the debt ceiling. They told the Associated Press somewhat shakily that they expect the debt ceiling issue will be resolved, but just in case, they are, quote, taking steps to protect their investors. Eek. And those are just the mutual fund people. I mean, if China does that, if Japan does that, with all the T-bonds they own, we'll all be living in yurts milking goats by next week. So Wall Street today started their sell-off of U.S. government bonds. Wall Street today decided to finally essentially rattle the cage about what's been going on in Washington. And inside the cage, inside Washington, they did get rattled. The Republican politics around the shutdown and the debt ceiling and what this is all about and where they ought to hold the line and what they're supposed to be fighting for just collapsed today. The narrative just collapsed. Two of the most aggressive conservative groups who've been pushing for the shutdown all along, who've been hounding any Republicans who wouldn't go along with the shutdown, today, two of those groups essentially bowed out. The CEO of Heritage Action which is the political activist part of the Jim DeMint group, the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Action is the group that ran targeted ads against 100 different Republican members of Congress. Republicans, hounding them for not signing on to that letter to John Boehner that demanded the shutdown last month. They ran ads against 100 different Republicans demanding that they take a hard line on the shutdown. Well, Heritage Action today said, we think that Republicans should pass that ceiling. Also today, FreedomWorks, which has been banging the drum for a shutdown for months now. Today, FreedomWorks CEO told the Huffington Post that, yeah, we also think they ought to pass a debt ceiling. At least get that part of it taken care of. You know, that same person, that same CEO from FreedomWorks 1 week ago, said, we will go past the deadline for the debt ceiling. And I don't think that's a bad thing. That was 1 week ago. But now, a week later, with Wall Street starting to get a little freaked out and political people starting to hear about it, 1 week later, he has completely changed his tune. Now he says, yeah, we need to pass the debt ceiling. Both the FreedomWorks flip-flop guy and the Heritage Action Group, they're sort of trying to save face by saying the only reason they don't want to blow through the debt ceiling now is because they don't want it to be a distraction from the focus on Obamacare. But at the same time that they made that argument today, Paul Ryan and Eric Cantor both published op-eds today saying that the Republicans need to keep up the fight for a whole bunch of stuff that does not center around Obamacare. Paul Ryan did not even mention Obamacare at all in the op-ed that he wrote in the Wall Street Journal today about what it is that the Republicans need to keep fighting about. So if you're looking for cues from Washington about what exactly is going on and why we're still shut down and what it's all about, you can take your pick today. They're either fighting only about Obamacare and forget the debt ceiling, or they are definitely fighting over the debt ceiling and forget about Obamacare. Okay. Whatever the strategy was before, it sort of evaporated today. Between the conservative groups and the members of Congress who supposedly are doing their bidding, or vice versa, absolutely no coherence as of today. And that was all before the Koch brothers freaked out today. The Koch brothers and their conservative funding bank, Freedom Partners, they spent nearly $250 million over the last year funding all of the groups that have been driving the shutdown fight. That creepy papier-mâché head, Uncle Sam wants to get in your pants ads, that ads telling college students to not get health insurance, funded by the Koch brothers, right? Heritage Action, which has been advocating the shutdown and whipping the vote on the shutdown and running ads against Republicans who are insufficiently hard line on the shutdown. Heritage Action, funded by the Koch brothers. The Tea Party Patriots, which put out the Defund the Government to Shut Down Obamacare toolkit, funded by the Koch brothers. They spent $236 million over the past year to fund basically every significant component of the shutdown effort. Shut down the government to stop Obamacare, brought to you by the Koch brothers. Well, today, the Koch brothers wrote a letter to Congress explaining that really they have no position on this whole issue. No position on the shutdown. Sure, they're against Obamacare, but they're not actually working on doing anything about it. They're just funding all of the groups that have been demanding that the government shut down as a way of trying to take Obamacare apart. Their letter says, quote, Koch has not taken a position on the legislative tactic of tying the continuing resolution to defunding Obamacare. And technically, I'm sure that is true, but they have also funded the entire network of organizations that have demanded that outcome and forced it on the country. Who us? Don't blame us. So the wheels are really coming off here. Republicans do not agree anymore on what they're trying to get or on how they are trying to get it. And they are clearly moving into that phase of the collapse where people try to make sure that they are not going to get blamed for what has just happened. It is starting to feel like this is ending.